Welcome to Global VID, a podcast about original productions and international TV and film distribution. I'm your host, Eric Y. Lapointe, and we're about to learn how people in our industry are expanding their footprint and finding the right partners around the world. This show was created by NNow Global and is also available as an audio format on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast application. Welcome to today's episode of Global VID, where I'm going to be joined by Vancouver producers Cedar Island Films and their two co-founders, Henrik Meyer and Andrew Williamson. Today we're going to not only talk about how Cedar Island Films came to be, but we're also going to take a deep look at their new National Film Board documentary called The Magnitude of All Things. And a special twist to today's episode is that we have invited Nathalie Bourdon, who is the Director of Distribution and Market Development at the National Film Board, or NFB for short, to join us for the second half of the conversation. So stick around for that, and let's get started by talking with Henrik and Andrew of Cedar Island Films. So welcome, Andrew and Henrik. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Very well, thank you.
So thanks for waking up super duper early in the morning to be with me. And I hope you're enjoying your coffee. Mine too.
I would say thanks for having us, but I don't know, podcast, media recording. Maybe I'll wait till the end to say thank you.
Yeah, maybe wait till the end. That's a good idea. So why don't you guys explain to me a little bit about, well, introduce yourselves and also Cedar Island Films.
I am a Canadian producer since about 10 years. Before that, I was actually a German producer. I moved here 17 years ago, actually, but it took a while to become a Canadian citizen. Back in Germany, I worked mostly on fiction, drama, worked for Studio Hamburg, actually built their feature subsidiary there. When I came to Canada, I actually was looking for a business partner from quite early on. I did lots of German productions in BC and Alberta and wanted to do more Canadian content. Then a documentary came to my desk, and I was reaching out to Andrew because I was looking for a business partner. That was about 3 or 4 years ago. I'll let you take it from there.
So, well, before we introduce Andrew, I'm curious, like, what made you want to come to Canada in the first place 17 years ago?
It was a combination of at least 2 things, if not 3. I was 39, and it was a good way to avoid a midlife crisis by starting completely anew. I had worked for Studio Hamburg 12 years, had big successes, big flops there. Yeah, one was biggest German theatrical release in 1995, comedy, which actually we are now doing a sequel of 25 years later. And the last film in Germany was Rosenstraße by Margarete von Trotter, which was in Venice, won Best Actress Award there, and had a big gala premiere in Toronto, and became one of the most successful foreign language films in the US in 2004. So I was looking what else is there, and maybe outside of Germany. And luckily at the same time, my then partner, now husband, US, and now we're both Canadian. So we immigrated to Canada together. There was no way for me to go to the US back then because it was under George W. Bush. And we had this promise to live in an English-speaking country. And what's better than Canada being in North America, but still being a bit European?
Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about that because one of the topics I wanted to touch upon today is your backgrounds and how you got into the industry in general. So I feel like we're already jumping in, which is great. Andrew, can you please introduce yourself and Cedar Island Films?
Sure. My name is Andrew Williamson. I'm a Vancouver producer and have been my whole career, I guess. Nice European connection. I lived in Europe for 2 years after film school and then came back to Vancouver and got started first by working at the Directors Guild. I produced my first feature with Shavik Entertainment. Then I worked for the Canadian Media Association. I started a short film event called Crazy Eights. So I sort of had this combination of like the business side of the business and also creative producing on holidays and weekends and off the side of my desk. Finally brought those things together, worked for a couple of local production companies. I was a principal in the last one. And then with launching Cedar Island, I'd gone back to producing on my own because I really wanted to focus on content with purpose. making films that had meaning for me, and experience producing Emergency Room for Knowledge Network was a big part of that inciting incident, and reminding me how powerful media can be. And so I was starting to develop some projects and had a slate together when Henrik approached me about The Whale and the Raven. And we realized we had really complementary networks and connections and shared interests, and thus launched Cedar Island. We announced actually at Hot Docs in 2018, which makes this an anniversary of sorts, because I'm ducking out of Hot Docs this morning to record this podcast.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for doing that. Before we kind of talk about your own personal backgrounds and how you got into the industry, how did the two of you come together? Like, so we've got some bits and pieces here where you were looking for partner Henrik, and then you contacted Andrew because you had a project in development. And I know how hard it is to move to a different place. Like, I moved from Montreal, and also had similar ideas, like, oh, maybe I'll look around for a business partner around town. And it's not always so easy when you move at a later age. So we have a lot in common there, Henrik. So how did Cedar Island finally come together? And by the way, full disclosure, I was your official witness for your incorporation papers. But still, I don't know the story.
Well, I just remember that you were actually an office neighbor at that time. So
that's right.
You were a witness full on.
For a good 6 months, we were in the same office. Yep.
Exactly. So just to give it a start, when I was approached by the German producers for The Whale and the Raven, I had never done a documentary, and I had meetings with them in Berlin at the film festival, and we were sitting at that hotel bar like everybody else. And back then, when you still did things like that, and
yep.
I'm not somebody who's good in pretending, so I couldn't pretend. Oh yeah, I know how to produce and set up and finance documentaries in Canada. I'd never done that. So that's why I wanted to reach out to somebody who had more experience in the unscripted or in the factual or non-fictional world. There's so many words for it. And then and Andrew and I knew each other for many years. We had several meetings, talked about what's going on in our lives, in our professional lives, and we had one friend in common. And I think I'm tempted to leave it to you, Andrew, to explain the word shortened.
Sure. And I think, what's interesting about the story is something I often tell people when they come into the industry, and I'm just realizing now that this was actually following my own advice. So we got introduced by Liz Shorten, who's the CEO at the Canadian Media Production Association, probably 10 years before we started working together. But we made an effort over those years to get together for coffees, even though there ostensibly wasn't a project or a purpose. And what I say to people is, I'm like, just take the time to a 15-minute call with somebody, or go and have a cup of coffee. You just never know what's going to come out of that. And you have to put the work into the network to keep it kind of vibrant. So I never would have thought at the time that this would be the result of those kind of check-ins with Henrik. And it was maybe every couple of years. It was by no means regular, but I guess we just had a sense that maybe we would find a project that was interesting. I was definitely intrigued by the European connections, but also by having this valued friend in common. So the term shortened applies to lots of people in the industry here in Vancouver and probably across the country. Liz is a consummate networker and has a very unerring instinct about who might be worth connecting with each other, and puts a lot of time and energy into that as part of her job.
And then you both each had your own companies. And now I'm going to probably mess it up, but yours was Off Island, and yours was Red Cedar, Henrik.
Got it.
And so tell me the rest.
I was about to say they, and when I say they, I'm meaning NFB, basically context with both of us. We set up a single purpose company. And I think Shirley Becrusi started to say at some point Cedar Island, because it was Red Cedar Films and Off Island Films. And that's where the name came from, that after a year of lots of stress, like financing, you go into production without having financing close and stuff like that. Under those stress moments, you really can learn if you can trust your partner or if there are any character kinks, and you still want to run. So after a good year, we still respected and liked each other and wanted to work together. So when it became clear from the NFB that they also liked this combination and actually brought up the name already, We thought it makes sense also to be stronger. Why have two very small companies if you can have one?
Yep. If you can have combined efforts.
Yeah, and Henrik kind of pitched me on the fact that we would only each have to change one word in all our kind of emails and website and whatever each. So I swapped out off and he swapped out red. And I think, it's interesting what you say about finding business partners. And I think we did a version of what couples do. I think we started kind of dating over the Way on the Raven. And then we got a little bit more serious because I had an office space at that point, which is where we connected with you. So Henrik's kind of moved in a couple of days a week, but then
That's right.
kept his autonomy. So it wasn't full time. And then we finally kind of took the plunge. So it was definitely a process. And I think that served us well.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing that. Now, let's go back to your individual backgrounds and, what brought you to the television industry in the first place. And Henrik, maybe you want to start because you already started giving us a little bit of a background in terms of like where you came from in Germany. But what I want to know is how you got into that space in the first place. What brought you to TV as a young adult starting up your career?
Thanks for letting the eldest talk first.
I don't know your ages, so you're admitting that.
I just admitted to Andrew the other day that this is my 30th year in the business after graduating from film school. So when I was a teenager, I did a Super 8 film. Some people might not know what that is. A Super 8 film at our school about how impossible it is to graduate high school and enter a creative job. Because we had those people telling us at school, basically, if you want to do a creative job, you can just also stay here because nobody wants you. We made a film about that, a really bad film. It was 45 minutes long, way too long.
It's a lot of film stock.
Yes, it was, and hence terrible. I was co-writer, co-director, co-producer, but the worst part was I was also the star of it. So I knew that I wouldn't want to be an actor. But the fascinating thing about that film was it got the creative juices flowing, but also it recouped the night of the premiere at our school because we charged everyone 2 Deutschmark at that time. It was before the Euros. With the 1,000, because it was 500 people there, with those 1,000 marks, we recouped the film. So there was the idea born to maybe become a producer. I had no connections to the film industry at all. I'm coming from a family of architects, and it was actually the expectation that I would become one too. And my grandmother was the one who said, "Thank God you do something else. The family can stay together," because otherwise I would have entered my father's company, being a competitor with my sister. So I started to do an internship in Hamburg. First, I also thought it could be very fancy to be a director. But then I realized that the producer actually hires the director in many cases, and
Right.
there are lots of ways to be creative because you are putting the package together out of a story, of an idea becoming a story with a writer, a director, and then some of the most exciting moments is also the cast, because then the magic happens, and you put all that together. And I always thought I'm more probably talented in organization and diplomacy than maybe being the super duper big artist. So that's why I decided to go for producing, and was then very lucky, but also I was also quite ambitious. I worked quite hard to get into the first intake at Munich Film School for the producers program. They only had directors before that, and for drama and for documentary, and then they started a new department for producing, and I was in the first intake, and that was fantastic for me. I moved to Munich and suddenly saw all those filmmakers and learned really hands-on how to produce. It's a school focused on making films and not just teaching the theory. It's actually called University of Television and Film in Munich. And then afterwards, I again was also lucky, but also knew somebody who knew somebody who ran Studio Hamburg, who hired me as a very young producer. And I had a junior in front of my title, junior producer, for about 2 months. Then we got rid of that junior because suddenly I had so many projects that I was a regular producer.
And Andrew, how did you get started in the industry?
I did a lot of theater in high school, acting and producing and directing and production managing, and was always interested in that. And I also had a love of photography, and I realized that theater and photography, if you put them together, became film. And I was really interested in what I'm still interested in, which is that idea that film can create change, or at least show people something from a different point of view than they have. So that power really drew me in, to work as a producer in Vancouver. And I'm quoting Sarah Dodds here, who once talked about a Vancouver writer's resume. I would say I have a Vancouver producer's resume, which means to stay alive in this market, you need to do a lot of different genres. So I've definitely had a broad range of experience. I think it's serving me in the market now where producers have to be diversified.
Why is that, Andrew?
Why do producers have to be diversified?
Yeah, here in Vancouver.
I think because there isn't the volume of orders that you would get in a center like Toronto, for example, where you could specialize as a TV series producer in scripted, for example, or strictly just a doc shop. I think here we need to be open to some different opportunities. So in our company, we do scripted service work, for example. We do documentary features. We do scripted series. We do doc series. And it just keeps the doors open to some more of those projects. I think in a smaller market like Vancouver, you can't limit yourself too much.
And so you felt like your background gave you all that experience to do those different genres?
Yeah, and I think now returning to that idea that content with a purpose is really the thrust for me in this industry. And I think The Whale and the Raven shows that. I think The Magnitude of All Things shows that. Even The Search that we service produced for CBC is in line with that. So, I think we feel like at the company that purpose has a broad application. It can include music, for example. It can include stories of, kids who've been adopted out trying to find their birth families. There's a wide range there, but I think it focuses you when you have to make some of those difficult choices about what projects are you going to pursue and what are you not going to pursue.
So we're going to talk about some of your projects today. Obviously, The Magnitude of All Things is one movie we're going to talk about. But before we kind of dive into that, let's talk about some of the international co-productions you guys are working on, developing. I know last year in 2020, a lot of producers went back to the drawing board and focused more on development because in many ways, there were many months where we couldn't even produce at all. Let's briefly talk about some of those development projects that you have right now.
Already before the pandemic, it started that we started more drama series, not only because it's something we love to do and which we also have done with other companies before. I think it's the best and also the highest art of storytelling. I love feature films because they have this wonderful structure. Honestly, I think feature films are easier to produce and to make than TV series. So we were tempted to try it, and we had meetings with fantastic executives who gave us insight into what they are looking for. They are not with those companies or broadcasters anymore, and we started to develop. And just to name a few, which happened, for instance, during also film festivals. Like there's one which it's called Containment, which we co-developed with Bavaria Studios in Germany. It's a very old contact of mine there. We wanted to do something about a German character who has to really basically fight for truth and fight to survive in Canada. And so that was the German connection. And then Andrew had the connection to the writer, Felicia Brucker. And now we're co-developing this together with Bavaria Studios, or their subsidiary Bavaria Fiction, GmbH. We have one other project, which is actually a feature film. That's the sequel to the hit comedy from 25 years ago, which I mentioned, with the same cast. So everybody aged quarter of a century.
Okay.
And so it has a big chill feeling for that. So we are working on that in Germany with Studio Hamburg or Letterbox.
So you're going to be co-producing a German comedy from Canada?
That is actually not an official co-production. Sometimes it is easier to not do an official co-production. Like There was one which was more the other way around, which I did before Cedar Island. That was Gold. It felt like a co-production, but it was actually a service production because there was no way under the treaty to co-production. And that's the same here for Talk of the Town. It will be shot in German. So there's not really a way for us to find Canadian distribution. And also it's German humor. Who wants to laugh about that? We also currently work together with, I would call her a dear friend by now, Marie Clemens, who is a fantastic filmmaker here in Vancouver. And we were looking for projects for quite a while. And then she and her co-creator, Catherine Bainbridge from Resolution Pictures in Montreal came up with a fantastic idea, which again had a strong German element. So, and then we went out and are talking to some of the, I would say, more attractive or biggest German companies and about it, and one contributed to the project already in a creative way. So we want to pursue this together now. And then I will leave it to Andrew because so much for Germany. I think the next one is Ireland.
Yeah, we've got a pretty good slate of active projects. I think we have about 15 projects in development, and the goal is definitely talent-led. So Henrik mentioned Felicia Brooker. We're also working with Anuka Okuma, working with Jada Gabrielle Pape, who's an Indigenous writer-director here in BC. We have a project with Jackie Kai Ellis. Those of us in Vancouver will know Boku Bakery is the only place to get a decent French croissant in the city. So we're developing something with her. We've optioned a book in the United States. We're working with a producer out of New York on that project. That's also a scripted series. We have the rights to a Rolling Stone article, a feature that came out last year with a journalist in the US, and that's gaining some traction internationally. It's very much a global story. We're working with the showrunner of Emergency Room. You know, it's all about keeping those relationships alive and focusing on the key talent, because I think that's what's most interesting in the marketplace, for sure. And also having enough of a variety so we can talk about different projects at different times.
So now, speaking of variety, let's talk about the magnitude of all things. This is an NFB, which stands for the National Film Board. So that's an NFB documentary that you produced last year, right? In 2020, or was launched in 2020?
Launched in 2020, shot in 2019.
Okay, so shot in 2019, thankfully, launched in 2020. And this is a story that really talks about, takes a look at climate change, but through the lens of how this affects humans, ultimately. And you found a producer that had a story that told it through by sharing about her sister who died of cancer, and ultimately how we are linked to the environment every single day. And what I really appreciated about this, obviously, when you work with the NFB, you're creating kind of like a legacy Canadian film, but this didn't feel like just a Canadian film. There were Canadian elements to it, and First Nations were included, but ultimately First Nations from around the world were included, which I found really fascinating. How, you're talking to First Nations in the Amazon, First Nations in Australia. So I think this is kind of like the perfect NFB film, very peaceful to watch, very sad to watch at the same time, but in a good way. It's like really makes you reflect on what we are doing to the environment. So tell me about how you managed to get a hold of that story and ultimately option it, because it's a beautiful story. And so congratulations on that film.
Thank you. Isn't it Sting that said, if you love something, let it free, and maybe it'll come back to you? It's a project that I fell in love with very early, but Jen was in negotiations with a bigger company in Vancouver. So I said, go. If they can put the financing together and you can get the film made, that's what's the most important. But that deal fell through, and that's how it ended up coming to Cedar Island. We already had a strong relationship with the NFB, and Jen had done some development with the NFB, and they wanted to bring a producer on to greenlight it. And we were something that was suggested, and then Jen was able to say, well, actually, Andrew was interested very early on in this project. So it was sort of a nice fit. And I would give a shout out to Story Money Impact, which is an organization here in Vancouver that has run a conference up at Hollyhock for many years and also does Good Pitch, which is part of Doc Society out of London. And, at one of their conferences in Hollyhock, I got to spend a lot of time with Shirley Bacrusi. At a second one, I spent a lot of time with Jen Abbott. It's, again, those networking, incubators, community-driven stuff that are so valuable, I think, in our industry. So it's an excellent association if anybody wants to check it out.
And ultimately, how did you guys, as producers, how did you help shape the storytelling elements? How did you help Jen bring her ideas to screen? I imagine there were limitations, budget constraints, the different elements or different things that you could bring to it to even enhance her ideas.
I will just chime in quickly. I will otherwise let Andrew speak because he clearly steered the project and the relationship. I met Jen quite late into the project, but when it became a Cedar Island project, but not before that. I don't have all that history with it, but to me, it just spoke on a very personal level. And actually, I also had heard of Jen's sister through my partner, and they went to the same school. So that was the connection when Andrew introduced me to Jen Abbott over wonderful pie at a bake shop here in Vancouver, Aphrodite's. It was, I think, from my end, it was from the beginning very clear that we were there to support Jen's vision because it is so personal. I mean, if you make a film about your sister dying, we could only basically help her, but I couldn't tell her how to tell the story because I didn't experience it. It was our task to really help it, pouring it into a financeable way, if that's a term, because even with a pretty high budget, which we had not only thanks to NFB, but also the Telus Fund and Telefilm, still we couldn't go to every continent, so we had to focus on certain areas. And
how many different countries did you manage to film in, either directly or indirectly?
5. I'm just counting 5, 6.
I mean, including maybe footage that you were able to obtain, because I remember you mentioned that there was one individual from one of the islands,
Kiribati.
Yeah, that came to Calgary, I think,
to get an award. Honestly, that's one of those miracles that happens in a show where literally it was going to be 7 hours from Australia and 4 planes to get to this island. Not only did we not have the time, we couldn't afford it. And so when all of a sudden he was offered a Peace Prize in Calgary and his assistant said, well, he's going to be in Alberta. Is that close to you guys? We were like, yes, it is. But I would just echo what Henrik's saying. I think, one of the jobs as a producer is to create a container for the director to let them do their work. Jen had done a lot of research and development on the project, but what I think we brought to the table was not only the ability to finance, but also the ability to make that vision real. And I do consider producers filmmakers in that way. Creatively, we had lots of conversations with Jen. Our first cut of the film was 4 hours. So definitely it's a collaborative effort to get it down to the running time that it is now. So I think there's lots of creative engagement, but I think that one of the most creative pieces is how do we take this huge vision and make it into something that's possible? And so I think a lot of our contributions to the project came that way, even starting out with a budget, like how many pieces can we fit on the table? And then how are we going to maximize this from a crew standpoint and introducing the DP to Jen, who's someone she hadn't worked with before. All of those pieces come together. I think it was a pretty great collaboration. But Henrik's right, it was a very personal story. So there's a lot of stuff that we were not going to even be giving notes on. We had conversations, but we were really clear to Jen in the beginning. It's like, this is a story you have to tell, and we're going to help you tell it.
Yeah, and it was, I think we had also a lot or enough to do with making it possible, because logistically it was just amazing. We were our office was a little bit like a travel agency, because we had to basically drop a crew in the Amazonian rainforest in Ecuador, and in Australia our crew was basically surrounded by wildfires. And then there were those wonderful ideas like, let's interview Greta Thunberg, and that was also not that easy. She was not that a big name at that time, but she was getting there, and she was very well. Yeah, she was very well known, and we actually made a contact to her through a German climate scientist who made the contact for us, and then she and her team agreed, and then we had to arrange that in Sweden. So they had to go to Stockholm, which we were able to combine with London, with Extinction Rebellion. So yeah, it was just lots of moving pieces on the world map, basically, in our office.
And I think we connected with that German climate scientist through Twitter, as I remember. So it's like by whatever means necessary, really.
Well, I think the angle of the movie is brilliant because everybody in some way or another can relate to it. Everybody has a sister. I have two daughters, so I saw the scenes where you see the two younger girls as they're in their younger selves, and it was emotional, to say the least. I'm going to stop there because I don't want to start crying on this podcast because I might. Yeah, because it's very, very touching. So thanks for sharing about this story and how it came about. I'm now very happy to bring on Nathalie Bourdon, who is the director of distribution at the National Film Board. She's based out of Montreal. Now that we are out of the festival circuit, or in the magnitude of all things is out of the festival circuit, it is now her job in Montreal with her team to sell your documentary around the world. So how are you, Nathalie?
I'm good, and yourself?
Very good. Good morning. So now MIP TV is behind us, and so now you've kind of gotten a feeling of what the appetite might be for this kind of documentary. Before we start talking about the distribution, from your standpoint, how is this documentary a little bit different than the other National Film Board documentaries you have seen in the past?
Well, first of all, every documentary is very different from each other. It's always a different point of view. This one is particular because it relates grief with the environment, the climate change. And I thought when I saw it that it was very smart, very fantastic approach of climate change. And I never saw that before. I never thought about it. When you see a documentary as a seller, you need to fall in love with it. And I did fall in love with that documentary. It's a beautifully shot. It's very smart. It's very clever. And what we want a documentary that will be there for a long time. It's a legacy one. And so we take our time in order to find the right home for it.
So Nathalie, now that you've kind of gone to these markets, maybe explain to us, what kind of broadcasters are buying documentaries from the National Film Board?
All the public broadcasters that have a duty to inform and offer an alternative view about different issues, they tend to buy feature-length documentaries, which is great. So all the PBS, the Yale in Finland, the Swedish SVT, all the public broadcaster, CBC as a matter of fact, they have that. But now we have also all the markets of the platforms, the specialized platforms that are broadcasting on their platform good documentaries. There's Netflix, obviously, there's Hulu, there's HBO, but there's also smaller platforms, DocuBay. Well, I could go on and name new platforms, but I think it's because we don't have any length issues, platforms are great also. And more, there's a non-exclusive deal, which give us the opportunity to sell it to more platforms.
Well, that's great because it sounds like not only are there the traditional public television channels around the world that often have collaborated with NFB for so long, now you've got this new opportunity where people are curious about watching documentaries. Do you find that there is a dumbing down, though? In some cases, I won't name any platforms in particular, but I feel like, certain platforms were airing really intelligent documentaries.
Yeah.
And now it's kind of getting dumbed down a little bit and getting more into sensationalism rather than good, intelligent stories.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It is unfortunate. But at the same time, I think that market could be transferred to other platforms. The public is smart. The public will go where good programming is. After a while on those platforms, they don't want to be fed with, like you say, dumbed down documentaries. Although there's still good documentaries on these platforms, but less. But I think that it's a niche market. It was always a niche market. And I think that the customer who wants to learn something, who is curious, they go where the content is.
Yeah.
And more, I mean, with Google, you could find anything you want. There's a super platform called WaterBear, sorry, and it's about climate change and environment, and they have a fantastic programming, and it's free, as a matter of fact. So I think there's the market is moving depending of those big ones, yes, but it makes more space somewhere else.
Okay, because the magnitude of all things is, it's got that Canadian element. It feels like a Canadian story. It feels like a legacy NFB project, but at the same time, it's much more global than many of the other NFB films I've seen in the past. Now, I haven't seen them all, but in this case, I think we just discussed earlier that they filmed this in 6 different countries around the world, and featured First Nations from different parts around the world, or even having Greta Thunberg out of Sweden talking about her perspective about climate change. I thought that was really super interesting.
That's a great hook, obviously, for a sales point of view. The quality of the image is fantastic. It's very cinematic also, and it's very dramatic at the same time. So for sure, there's audience over there, but we're just starting to sell. I mean, we start to sell it when we start the festival phase. We start with soft pitch and everything, and then after the festival, we are more aggressive. But I could say that after MIP TV and Hot Talks, magnitude of all things was on the forefront of our offer. And every broadcaster is having it at this moment and is looking at it. There's a lot of interest. Now you have to find the right timing also, because they have few slots, and they're maybe not going to buy it on the spot, but they're going to buy it for a year or 2 in advance. So we need to be patient, and there's a lot of interest from many broadcasters at this moment and platforms. We could put it on all the platforms we want. So first, what we do, we offer it to broadcaster, to a sub-distributor who goes in their territory, and then we'll go on platform.
MIP TV is a fraction of what MIPCOM is. And of course, with the pandemic that happened, I did participate in MIP TV, and I found it very hard to navigate. So I don't think it's the big show, and hopefully things will continue to pick up as we get closer to October and closer to this, maybe this a new normal post-pandemic for sure. So maybe we could talk a little bit about your collaborations. This is not the first NFB project you guys have done. And so this is, I believe, the second project you guys have worked on together, right?
Yes.
So maybe talk a little bit about your relationship, and maybe some tips for producers out there that want to know, well, how much should we bug the distributor? And maybe tips from the distributor saying, well, here's how much you should bug me. Just kind of give people an insight, especially those producers who are starting out in the business and or working with distributors for the first time. What's some good advice you could give? And let's start with Andrew and Henrik, with your past experience.
Sure. I mean, I think I would characterize the relationship with the NFB as very collaborative, which is something that we really appreciate. I think there's an open dialogue. We've seen Nathalie at many markets. She's made time to meet with us, or now in COVID times, hop on the phone. And that communication is really helpful, because, you do get the kid ready and then send it off to daycare, and you kind of want to know what's happening out there with it. And Nathalie's great with those updates. And I think producers can also make sure the distributor has the key piece of information that they need too, about, what people are responding to. And the NFB is great because we have the festivals department along with distribution. Everybody's tracking the festivals we're getting into. Magnitude's had a great run already. We won Best Canadian Feature Doc in Toronto. We just won a prize in Korea. We got into IDFA, which is the biggest doc festival in the world. So having all that information, making sure she has it at her disposal, or any intel that we get out of the marketplace, I think that's something you can do proactively as a producer, and Nathalie is super open to that, which is awesome.
And you have the NFB as a co-producer at the table from the beginning. So the exec producer Julie Vercruci basically brings the distribution point of view to the table as a producer on the project. So
interesting.
Yeah, so that's quite unique.
Did that influence the aspect of, you know, going out to 5 or 6 different countries and focusing on First Nations from around the world, or was that part of the original idea from the start?
I would say that was part of the original idea from the start.
Okay.
Yeah.
Definitely portraying indigenous people, and those countries were in the focus from the beginning, especially Ecuador and Australia.
And Nathalie, do you have any tips for, with all the producers that you work with, what's the best way to be proactive with a distributor like yourself?
Well, I think Henrik and Andrew are the perfect co-producer because they're respectful, they are involved, they let us do our job, they ask questions, and I think it's every co-producer's right to ask questions and to want to know what's going on. And obviously, sometimes it could be hard because you have so many co-production and so many production at the same time. But they are very involved in it and collaborative. And we're trying on our side to give them as much information as we can. I must say that sometimes co-producers are not hands-on, and sometimes they are hands-on. It really depends of them. But I could understand that after working 4 years, 5 years, 3 years on a project, it's hard for them to just let it go and just say, okay, go do your job and don't bother me after that. Of course, they're not going to do that. Of course, they're going to know what's going to, of course, they're going to want the Netflix sell. Sorry, I said Netflix. But obviously, they want the best for their baby. And this is totally understandable. So I keep that in mind all the time with my collaboration with co-producer, because we have to have respect on both sides. It works well with Henrik and Andrew because I know them now since 4 years. I've been in the market. I've been talking to them. I've been into the making of it, like in the background, obviously, just hearing about it. You know, sometimes there were questions of pre-sales here, pre-sales there. Yes, of course. You know, as many pre-sales as you could have, so it's made. But what I found that is very helpful is we created a tool, a CRM tool, customer relationship management, where we log in every pitch we make. And since we start doing this, it's very helping everybody understand the effort we're making. You know, and I think that's what is important, that they know that we're working on it. We're working on their title, on their baby. And when Magnitude of All Things will be like push for a long time because it's really a prime title. And
it sounds like a balance is important because there's the two extremes. There could be over involvement in such a way that you're actually interrupting the workflow. And then there could be under involvement where it's like maybe a producer just says, you know, my job is to produce, I'm done. And then they disappear, right? So both scenarios could take place hypothetically. And I think what's maybe important for all producers to know is there's a life cycle to, or there's a whole cycle to the distribution game. And I always like to say kind of 18 months is a good gauge, because you first have to launch the program, get the word out there. And then depending on when you launch, like if you launch at MIP TV, well, independents are not favored at the beginning of the year because, you know, the budget left over for independents is normally at the end of the calendar year. And that's where MIPCOM becomes very important for a lot of the independent distributors and the independent producers. And so I always say that 18-month cycle is very important just to takes like 6 months almost to get your first sales and to get the buzz going. And then you need another 6 months. And then finally, if the project catches fire, then you start seeing your full sales with between that 12 to 18-month cycle.
But it also takes a long time to negotiate contracts. It could take up to 6 months to negotiate a simple distribution contract in the US, for example, which it's happening right now. The first time I talked to the guys about that distributor that I won't name just to not jinx stuff, it was 6 months ago. And, I think also what is important when you work with co-producer is when there's big decisions to be made, you just talk to them about it. Obviously, a distributor in the US is important. So obviously, you take the phone and you call them and say, hey, I've got this offer. What do you think about them? Da, da, da. And on my side, if for any reason a co-producer would say, I really don't like him. I really don't like them. I heard bad. I don't know. For any reason, we talk about it. If they're not comfortable with that, I will not do the deal for sure. Because those deals are 7 years, 10 years. So it's like a wedding,
Yeah.
You have to be sure that it's the right partner. So if the co-producers are not comfortable with that decision, it's a big deal,
So you actually you consult with the producers on all the sales?
Not all the sales, but the important one, yes,
Yeah.
for sure.
Okay.
I mean, it does have an impact on everything, but it's a lot of job, Eric, to manage this with every co-producer. So but you have to do it.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to do those package deals, and you can't necessarily go, I have 10 approvals to to go back to.
Yeah.
So,
but on documentaries, and it's very important. There's a special attention there that you can't miss.
So just to wrap up our conversation today, maybe tell us what's next for Cedar Island Films, Andrew and Henrik.
Well, we are hoping for another film with the NFB. I won't say anything else. And that's why I think we really appreciate distributors like Nathalie, who involves us in the important things, but not in everything, because we also have lots of things going on, because we are doing documentary and drama, feature length and series. So that's a lot if you especially think outside of Canada as well, so internationally. So for us, it will be focusing on our projects in co-development with international partners and being out there at the markets. I mean, Andrew is currently doing more markets than me, then I will do more again. So that's what we're gonna do.
Coming out of COVID now, so looking forward to a production summer with hopefully a degree of normalcy. I'm part of RDV with Telefilm, so doing 4 markets. And just to kind of link to the conversation we just had, Nathalie, I'm going to send you an email because I had a meeting yesterday with someone who's interested in both of our NFB titles, which is fantastic. So just proof positive that this conversation is alive and active all the time.
And what's your best guess for the return of real markets?
I am so torn. There's so much I love about the virtual experience. No travel, no emissions, no jet lag. It's the networking piece that nobody has figured out. World Congress came closest to nailing it. And so that's the missing piece.
I would say check if you guys are going to the Banff World Media Festival. I don't know if that's, I would say they've really did a good job. I didn't participate last year, but the same organization was involved with Kidscreen, and I did attend that back in February, and they nailed it when it came to networking. They offered a bunch of opportunities to just drop in these kind of virtual rooms that were meant for networking. They created these little events. They created like these speed meetings. And then after that, they had really quick meet and greets where they would match you up with other delegates for every single 3 minutes. So you could show up for a half an hour and do this instant networking. If there was a connection, you exchanged the email. So it was almost like, in some ways, it was using technology to make it better than a cocktail event, because at a cocktail event, you're going to get pulled right, left, and center. Whereas when somebody's in front of you for 3 minutes, you give that person your attention for those 3 minutes. So So yeah, check out Banff World Media Festival. I'm sure they're going to do a great job. But yeah, I'm looking forward to those moments where we can actually network again, because that's such an important piece to what we do.
MidCom should be presential.
Should be
MidCom?
Yeah, hopefully.
In person.
Are you guys planning on going back with the NFB?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
No matter what?
Yeah. No matter what.
Let's see how fast the French decide to vaccinate themselves.
Yeah.
Well, they're going fast now. So
That's good. That's good. I did read a stat that it said 50% of the French did not want to get vaccinated, but that was maybe 3 months ago. So who knows? That might have changed. Thank you so much to all three of you for joining me today. I really appreciate your time and wish you very well with your project. Thank you so much, and have a great summer.
Thanks.
thank you.
Bye.
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 Yeah.
And thank you for listening to this episode of Global VID. Those were my guests, Andrew Williamson and Henrik Meyer of Cedar Island Films, and Nathalie Bourdon of the National Film Board in Montreal. And thank you as always to Nicole Almeida, our video editor, and Amber Goodwin and Aaron Ross for the music. Thank you, and see you next time.